Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding, and we are in for our third episode of the Truths of Female Bodybuilding Roundtable series. Now, Sarah, Romana, and me are joined by Laura, who is an international guest, which, Laura, this always excites me because I feel like Americans say it how it is. So I'm sure you will deliver.
So I'll do my best to represent today.
So
Sorry,
thank you for
sorry.
your time, of course.
Laura, who's that in the background on the
Oh,
sofa?
that's my pug. This is Frankie. Can you see him?
Oh,
Yeah.
he's on view looking at the screen.
I was
Love a
trying to I was
doggo.
trying to move it when it was his butt. But he's in a relaxed state, so this is probably okay. It's probably
That
okay.
reminds me of when bikini, it's like bikini shows are one from the back.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's just showing off his glutes.
So today it's going to be super cool because we're actually going to talk about, now this is Romana and Sarah and I have spoken about the impact of social media before, but it's going to be cool to have your input as well. And then the risk versus reward, essentially, not just for PED users, but natural athletes as well. Because I think, again, an oversight sometimes that if you're natty, that it's healthier, or and we all know that's not the case. There is still risk versus reward. And then the federation choices, and I know it's going to be different, of course, for you, Laura, but also choosing your category. There's a lot of listeners that sort of get into the sport and they're like, what category do I go in? And I think that a lot of the time people start in sort of bikini, maybe figure, and then would work their way up if they wanted to. But I feel like sometimes Instagram can be quite confusing in regards to what you see and what actually goes into that, and then the genetics, of course, and what you're willing to put in. I'm sure you have this yourself as well with clients and your own journey as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm excited for our discussion today too, because I think there's a lot of ways you could approach competing as a new person, right? You might have a division you like, but maybe your body at the time is not suited for it. So do you start in a smaller category like bikini, or do you just start in the division you want and grow into it? So I'm excited to chat with you ladies about that today.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I reached out to you off the back of a reel that you did about, actually, there's, to a certain degree, depending on your federation, sometimes more muscled women are getting awarded in the bikini division. So again, it's like if you go down the IFBB route compared to an amateur fed, I think that sometimes maybe you can get into it and think, right, I can climb up to IFBB Pro, which is where you guys are at. But actually, there's a lot more that goes into it, and often time in the sport, which, sometimes can be underestimated. I'm sure you'll all agree with that.
I think in England at the moment, so I think a lot of the bikini girls are now asking to be seen harder than ever before, which is something that's only really changed, I'd say, in the last like 4 to 6 months, where you're seeing these girls that I would have put in trained figure or athletic figure, but then they're actually coming down to bikini and being awarded for more condition, which for me does surprise me. But I guess it's ever changing times and we can just work with it. But for me, like, bikini was always, as an amateur level, obviously, like you said, getting higher the ranks, the more kind of impressive the physique is and the more kind of demands on that physique. But I think, I always thought that bikini was supposed to be that slightly softer look, but it now seems in the amateur ranks over in the UK that it seems to be much harder nowadays, which is interesting.
Yeah. Is that the same for you, Laura, that you've noticed?
There's definitely a lot more muscle mass in bikini than there was just a few years ago. One thing I've noticed, and I could be a little off here, but what I notice when I look at, because I'll watch a lot of these pro shows, especially in bikini, I'm kind of paying attention to what's going on. It seems like the European bikini athletes do tend to come in harder and smaller, I would say, than our US, like I'm talking more pros. But in general, it seems like the British athletes or the European athletes, they just get awarded for kind of a harder look. And I think in the US, they're a lot more strict on how much is too much in bikini. Like if you are starting to have striations, if you are starting to have separation in your quads, or quads that are a little too dense, they will kind of dock athletes for that. It can still happen, right? If you have a really, really good physique overall, but maybe just a little bit of separation or something. But yeah, it's bikini's evolved a lot. And I think that was the reel that you found me through. It's evolved a lot. I think each year it's a little bit more muscle, but I think you could also make that argument with the other divisions too, right? I mean, figure, back when I got interested in competing, that was around 2013 or so. And so I would look at these magazines. Back then we had like Oxygen magazine, Muscle and Fitness Hers. I don't know if you guys had that in the UK, but I would read these magazines or go on bodybuilding.com, which was like, that was the thing too back then. And I was trying to decide, I'm like, do I want to compete in bikini or do I want to compete in figure? I actually liked the figure physique better back then, but figure back in 2013, 2014 is what bikini became in 2018 or 2019, you know? So it's like, I'm in that division now. So I think all of these divisions we're constantly pushed to be more competitive, more muscular. I don't know if you ladies agree with that or not, but that's kind of what I've seen.
Do you think the way that bikini is going is a positive way? Like you said, there seems to be like, you know, me and Romana are obviously physique pros, and we completely, I'm assuming, Ro, you agree with the fact that things are getting more muscular and we are going that way of more muscle, more condition. But do you, as a bikini pro, like, do you like the way it's going, or would you rather have a look that it used to be more like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say yes and no. I think in some ways the bikini division, it's getting better and better. At the same time, the drive for more muscle mass, it is leading a lot of both pros and amateurs to be more risky, right? To accept more risks. And I think at times too, social media, it makes us feel like we're under this time crunch that as bodybuilders, we shouldn't be, right? We all know this is a sport of patience. We should just kind of go at our own pace and try to tune out the world a little, but social media makes it very hard. Our friends are on social media. If we're coaching, we're probably using it for our businesses. And so I think in bikini, we see people taking more risk. And ultimately what I see as a coach, and I'm here in Southern California, so there's so many shows here. Only in the last year or two have I started to notice at these local shows that I'm seeing young amateur girls with signs of virilization in bikini, like visible signs, right? And to me, you know, we're all adults, right? So even if you're in your early 20s, you're an adult, you can make choices however you want. That's not my business to tell you what to do. But it is, to me, it is a little concerning because I think of bikini as kind of that entry level division. It's supposed to be the most natural looking division. It's all, we've always heard it talked about as like this, you know, fit, beautiful girl on the beach, and she just threw on a bikini and hopped on stage. And that's what the look is supposed to be. And as it gets, you know, as we're taking on more and more risk and we're seeing more virilization, to me, like the look that I fell in love with and what I fell in love with as bikini is not that. It's still like we should, in my opinion, I think we should look like models. We should look beautiful, right? We should look very feminine. And when I see those changes, it does make me a little nervous. And I also think that some of these women who are very young, maybe 20, 22, they might feel a lot different about their choices at 30 or 32 or 35, right? There's a lot of life. There's a lot of life. You might feel way different, you know, 10 years down the road.
Literally thinking about, and going to say that, it's like when you're in your early 20s, you see the stage, you see the prep, you see other competitors, and you're taking those risks, but do you really know that the choices you make in your early 20s could have such a significant impact later down the line? We talk about the fact that potentially we've got amateurs and pros running more PEDs and taking more risks than they have done in the past. My concern is, do those competitors at that early age actually know that they are risking their fertility and their hormones later on down the line? Because I know when I started at like 33, I was actually having this conversation this morning. I had no idea about PEDs. I had no idea that being in a deficit would be a risk. I mean, I was 33, so it's quite a lot older. But when you're in your early 20s and maybe you don't know yet whether you want children, and maybe if you don't want children, those decisions could change later down the line. And it's like, do you know that putting yourself through a prep and exposing yourself to these compounds could potentially mean you can't have children in the future? And is that a risk that you want to take at such a young age?
Yeah, and I think that, like you all agree, you know, with the social media, when you first become a bodybuilder and you think, right, I'm going to prep to go to stage, you're so fueled up on it and it's exciting. You know, I've come from trauma and not knowing my place in the world, and bodybuilding gave me that sort of opening to go, wow, I've got purpose. You know, I've got something I can pour my energy into. And to a certain degree, I think that, you know, a lot of people, it's like when you are younger, maybe when you're older as well, but it doesn't matter about the risks right now. I've found this thing, you know, I've finally made a community, you know, people want to speak to me, people want to see my physique shots. And then, like you say, Mana, you know, it gets to that point where it's like, well, actually, what I've done in my younger life, maybe you can't have children, as virilization, etc., etc. And be interesting to know your guys' thoughts on, from a coaching standpoint, something I talk a lot about on the podcast, where sometimes coaches aren't letting clients know before using compounds what the risks are. I get a lot of people then reach out and, you know, we don't need to say, oh, you need to take this or whatever. And we're not saying take PDs even, but I get people reach out and they say, you know, well, I'm taking 25 milligrams of Anamar every day and I've done that for 5 months, or, you know, these sort of examples. And they didn't realize that virilization was even a thing, because the coach has said, you know, it's really going to help with your prep. You're going to look better. There's no side effects. So I don't know if you guys have come across this sort of talk as well with the coaching space.
Come across it quite a lot from the blood work side of things that I do, where, you know, I'm sat there taking down, and part of the process is, you know, what are you currently running PED wise? And they're giving me these cycles, and it's like, wow, do you know what that could be doing to you? And it's like, no, my coach, just says it. But I think, coming from a medical background, it completely baffles me that within the bodybuilding industry, we don't have this thing called informed consent as widespread as there is in the medical world. You know, a risk is a person's choice to make. And it's, if they choose to make that what we deem poor decision or what have you, as long as they have all the information to make that decision, it's up to them whether they want to make it or not. And without all that information, you can't make that informed decision. Now, some coaches might argue, and I've had this experience myself, when early on in my bodybuilding sort of career, it was, well, you should have looked at it, you should have read up about it yourself. But, you know, when you are new to the sport, you do have that naivety. And I think as a responsible coach, it's part of your job, before you prescribe any compounds, to go, well, this is what it could or couldn't do to you. Go away, have a think, do your own research. Do you want to take this risk? This is what could happen in the worst case scenario.
Every coach should have a duty of care over their athletes, shouldn't they? And it's kind of like moving over to PEDs from natural to an assisted athlete is not like, shouldn't be taken lightly. It should be, this is what happens. You need to understand the risks of that said drug, whatever it may be, male or female, whatever. But you need to understand what's going on, and you need to really think hard and long about the pros and cons before you even consider jumping on. And then we've had this discussion, Sarah, before, where you're like, okay, have you got this, you know, have you got your food now? Have you got your training now? Have you got your recovery now? Because if you're just going to jump on cycle without any of those variables that are absolutely nailed, then it's like pissing in the wind, really, isn't it? You're not going to achieve anything.
For sure. Laura, do you come across this in your space?
Yeah. I think this comes, I'm sure this comes up a lot. There are many women I've talked to where they were taking PEDs with very minimal directions from a coach, no lab work a lot of times, where, you know, they're not checking in on their internal health. And you're absolutely right too. It's very counterproductive to be running gear or taking anything if you don't have the fundamentals as a bodybuilder down. So at times, like, I'll have clients that will ask for things like, oh, you know, I've really heard that Anavar will make me more competitive or this or that. And it's like, look, you're not even following your meal plan. So like, let's start there first. You know, you've got to have your nutrition down. You've got to have your training. You know, you're missing workouts. Like, if you don't have the basics dialed, you're not going to look any better with PEDs. You know, the PEDs should not be a Band-Aid for your lack of hard work. It's like, you should, and it's like, I really like if I'm guiding a client on anything like that, I want them to demonstrate that they're good, like, you should be a good bodybuilder. And actually, I had a conversation with a client who's interested. She's a new competitor. And she, you know, she started with me in an off season, and there were like some inconsistencies and things. So I'm like, look, you need to be a really good natural bodybuilder before we think about adding anything in. So I understand that you think you want to do this for a long time, and, you know, we talked about some things, but what I like to have clients do, if they're interested in things, we'll have an initial discussion. Okay, here's what XYZ does. Here's what it is. Here's, you know, some of the perceived benefits. Here are risks. Now, I want you to also go Google this, and I want you to break this all down for me in a future discussion. I want to know that you understand this. You're not just going off, you know, even though I'm going to really keep their health in mind. It's like, I want you to do your own research. If you can't even use Google to look up the side effects, you have no business taking it. Like, you know, you're you're like so concerned about taking creatine or, you know, a probiotic. It's like, but yet you won't even Google a PED. Like, come on, like let's not be lazy. That baffles my mind.
The capacity to understand the information comes in. If you don't, and that sounds really harsh, but if you don't have the capacity to understand what you're putting in your body and what it does, you probably shouldn't be using it. And I'm not talking about at a microbiological level or a pharmaceutical level. I'm talking about just generally like the virilization side of things and the, like you say, the risks and the benefits. If you can't process that information, you probably don't have any business. I don't know if that's me being harsh.
That makes sense.
It's definitely not. You're spot on there.
And when we sort of delve into this from a coaching standpoint as well, something that I discussed with my other half is that if someone comes to you and maybe they're not nailing the basics, the fundamentals, and they want to use PEDs, I always get this sort of mixed, I get this pull and push. If I don't then help someone, are they then going to go with another coach and fuck themselves up? Now, I know that's not essentially my fault or whatever, but I feel like my nature is like, it's really difficult for me to then accept, okay, so they're then going to get another coach and potentially go down that route. And I don't know your thoughts on that. I've never sort of voiced that on a pod before, but when someone isn't nailing the fundamentals, but they're so dead set on using PEDs, what would you do as coaches in that scenario? Because it's a bit tricky, isn't it, at times?
I think I'd probably just say what Laura said, and the fact that there's no discussion to be had. You either start nailing the fundamentals, or you know, there's no discussion to be had really. They'll start nailing the fundamentals, or there's nothing that we think about other than nailing those fundamentals. I'm not putting someone's health at risk for the fact that they can't follow the basics, because if they can't follow the basics, then how are they going to know what they're going to be putting into their body? And then they're probably just going to be like, oh, I'll just throw a bit of this and that. And then it's just their health just spirals. And then who's to blame? Probably the coach, because they don't have anyone else to blame but themselves, but they don't want to blame themselves because they'd rather blame someone else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you can't take responsibility for what other people choose to do without your guidance. If you're not giving them what they think they need or want, and they choose to go to somebody else, it's that saying you kind of have to sort of let it go for your own mental well-being, because you can't worry about every person that you don't actually have any interactions with now.
Yeah. I think it's like almost my nature. I'm like, oh, but what if they then go to a coach and they end up it's certainly something that I wouldn't then, you know, take on a client if that was the case. But I always have this sort of mixed, like I say, a push and pull in my own mind as to what happens if I don't. But then, like you say, Mana, it's like, and this is the reason I want to raise it as well, is because there could be coaches listening in a similar scenario. And I know even from the basics of when we put it back to what a prep is, whether it's natural or assisted, if you take someone on and there is red flags, not following the food plan, not following the basics, things like that, you as the coach, you get to a point in their prep where they're not able to do it, or their mental health is suffering, etc., etc. The list goes on. You're the one that's, you know, you're going to have to put time into that athlete. And if you're ignoring these things, if someone does sign someone up and they go down the PED route, but they're not following the basics, guess what? You're going to probably have a pretty shit time. And I think it's sometimes important for coaches to listen and go that, yes, it might be a paycheck, but I personally don't believe it is worth that worry. And of course, where that person ends up, right? Also interested in regards to that. So when we're putting a client through a prep, now I know Sarah, you shared one of Christian's posts about this, and I agree. You know, when someone does cheat on their diet and there's a lack of communication there. Now I personally won't put someone through a prep if they're not able to nail a diet even in a maintenance or an off season. But again, they might jump coach or whatever, and that's not our problem per se. What have you guys come across, you know, clients that are in a prep and things aren't happening the way the trajectory is planned, and, you know, they're saying I'm following everything, but things aren't changing as you maybe expect? Apart from getting blood work done and trying to communicate with the client, is there anything additional that you can sort of think of that I know obviously you can just say you're not following the diet, but if you know what I mean, if someone's holding something back and they're not being honest, what would your sort of opinions be for anyone listening that's struggling with clients that are doing this?
The first things I probably do is check with that client whether they're having anything that they think is okay to have when they're on prep. Like, are they, like we talked about in the last podcast, are they covering their food in skinny syrups and, you know, putting sweeteners in their coffee and drinking like
Latte.
I actually got caught out on the Olympia prep. I got caught out with prime drinks. In my little prep haze, I thought prime drinks were 0 calorie. They're not.
Yeah. I almost got
And
caught with that,
like,
actually, bro, to be fair.
sorry?
I almost got caught with that as well, to be fair. I was like, I looked, a good thing I actually just looked at them because I was like, oh, actually, they're not.
It was so fucked I couldn't even process. And it was about 4 weeks when Dan suddenly went, do you realize, like, I don't think we realized these actually had calories in them. And that wasn't like an intentional thing. So I would firstly probably check with the client whether, you know, are they putting those like powders on their chicken to flavor it other than just herbs and spices? Anything, any of those hidden calories? First, are they still having milk in their coffees? That sort of thing. That would be my first step, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd probably be mine as well, to be fair. Just to ask that question whether they're adding anything that they think or they deem is okay, when actually it could be adding copious amount of calories and halting of like fat loss.
Yeah, for sure. Laura, have you got any sort of other things that you would
Yeah, I will go into full on, like, Sherlock Holmes detective mode if a client is not losing weight when they should be. So a few things. So one thing I always do is just kind of a preventative step now. I didn't do this when I first started coaching athletes, but I've learned natural or enhanced, I always need lab work before they start prep. I've had natural athletes where maybe their thyroid's a little sluggish or they've got kind of low testosterone. And then it kind of, I had one client in particular, she was working really hard, couldn't get her leaner. And I think it was just a matter of like her thyroid needed some support there. But if someone's not losing weight, I will cover all bases. So I always ask for training videos periodically, and especially when someone's new, like I like to see their form. Obviously, if I'm not in person with them, I want to make sure they're being safe. I want to make sure they're training to failure, they're training intensely. That I find if people are not training intensely or doing cardio intensely enough, they won't lose weight at the same rate. And sometimes, new athletes, if they're new to the gym, they're not pushing themselves that hard. And so sometimes you have to nicely remind them, like, hey, you have to go to failure. You're not just counting to 15 and calling it a day. So like, let's, even if you're tired, your weight might be lower, but you still got to push to failure. So sometimes you got to look at the training. I will ask about cardio settings, like, hey, because I will give kind of ballpark cardio settings in prep. Like, okay, if you're going to use the Stairmaster, aim for this. Your heart rate should roughly be in this zone when you do that. So I will ask about their cardio settings. If they're too low, I'll tell them, hey, you need to bump this up a little. And then for food, I think sometimes we have that almost like intuition if a client is like not on point with their diet, but you can nicely ask. There are times too where I'll ask a client, I'm like, hey, I just, choose a day this week. I want to see all the photos of your meals, including any seasonings you're putting on it. And I try to express all this in a very kind, like tactful way too, not make them feel like they're doing something wrong. Just, hey, we need to figure this out. I will even say like, hey, I know you're working hard, give them the benefit of the doubt. I know you're pushing yourself, but we need to see you drop at a little faster rate. So we got to cover all of our bases. So I want you to send me all of your meals for one day. If they can't do that, if they don't do that or they can't do that, that's a red flag, right? If they won't be transparent or they won't do that just basic step of taking a few photos and messaging them over to me, that's a red flag, right? I also have this strategy with my clients' Instagram stories. Like, I don't like to watch all of them. I don't want them to feel like I'm spying on them. And sometimes I will mute them too on purpose, just so they don't feel like that. But there are times where I'll go, look, if something's off, I will be looking at your Instagram stories. If I see you out at a restaurant with your friends, like my spidey senses are going off that something's up here. And so there are times too, I've had to nicely call clients out, like, hey, is there anything you're not telling me? Like, I'm not here to judge you or anything. Is there anything you're not telling me if it gets to that point? So, and there are times where clients have come forward and admitted that they've gone off plan. And so then, the guidance and direction I'm giving them has to kind of change because I know that their adherence might not be on point.
I like the way that you said off plan, Laura, instead of cheat. I personally don't like to use the word cheat because it's
Same.
almost kind of spiraling that negative thought process of you've cheated, you've been bad. And although what they've done is counterproductive to what they're trying to achieve, I don't want them to feel like the world has ended because they've done that. And it's about encouraging the positive behavior, not damning the negative behavior. So it's like, right, okay, you've gone off plan. Let's do this X, Y, and Z to fix it. How do we prevent that from happening again? Rather than going down the you cheated on your diet, because then they're just going to feel shitty about themselves, I guess.
Mhm.
It's going to
Yeah,
be like a
yeah,
spiral, isn't it?
absolutely. I'm right there with you. I really don't like to use words like cheat or, like bad or good, like, oh, I ate good this week. Like I really am very thoughtful with my language and how I communicate with clients, because I think as women, we have just so much history of stigma with our bodies and weight loss that come from decades, not just in bodybuilding, but outside of it. So I really try to take away the, connotations that you've done something, horrible, or you're a bad person, like cheat. Like if I give them a extra food, I will call it a refeed. I will call it a free meal instead of a cheat meal. Right. Just that undertone of like, a little bit more objective, a little more science-based. You're either adherent to your plan or you're not adherent, rather like, you're bad or you're cheating. I think some of those subtle language differences really make a difference.
For sure. Like there's so much
About
so much from the intention of, and also sometimes that when you're communicating with a client, they can take it in a completely different way. We know that, right? If you write a message, if you write an email, the client could take it in any way. So the intention from the coach being from that standpoint of, we're not trying to make you feel bad. We want to help. We're here to educate, right? This is our job. And then it's that fine balance of, if you are really nailing in, really going to town with someone, are they then going to go even more so into the binge behaviors, any of the negative sort of things that can come up? And does that then have a knock-on effect to their relationship with food and themselves as well?
I remember when the word cheat meal was like all the rage for ages. Like everyone was like cheat meal this, cheat meal that, and then obviously it just had that negative connotation kind of pop up, and then it has. I think more people do use the word off plan or refeed nowadays, which is good to see.
Yeah, for sure. I think as well what you said, Laura, about thyroid, for that client that you mentioned, that actually, we want to look at the blood work, but also, and we touched on this in the last pod we did, girls, about some athletes have got to go incredibly low calorie and pretty high expenditure to get to stage condition. And I think that sometimes there's almost this misconception that they're maybe seeing other athletes that are on higher calories, less cardio or whatever. And actually it's like, well, I don't want to go that low, but sometimes some people have got, we mentioned before, sorry, you went as low as like 800. I went to like just under 1,000, Romana 1-2. And Laura, I'm sure you've experienced lower calories. Sometimes you've got to really push to get the fat off,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to know what's the difference between you and someone else. I think when you're a new athlete, you might not understand. Like maybe you're brand new, you're natural. You don't understand that these girls that are talking about all the food they're eating are taking, really heavy duty fat burners, maybe multiple things that are speeding up their metabolism. You don't realize that, like for me, for compared to most bikini athletes, I'm on stage over 150 pounds. Most bikini athletes are like 100, 110 maybe. So I always joke that I'm a bikini competitor and a half. So like my food should be more, right? Because I'm a bigger person. It's the same thing as a, open bodybuilder who's, 220 versus, or a guy in the 212 versus, Samson, who's like on stage at 300. So there's a big difference there. And so sometimes I think when you're new or you're just getting started, you don't understand that like we all have different bodies. We all might have had different off seasons that set us up for our prep. So if you have an off season where you never got your calories up, it's going to be hard to eat a lot in your prep. So I think newer athletes sometimes struggle to comprehend the differences.
And I think like social media will play a massive role in that, because the amount of times I get people say, oh yeah, but she looks like this, and but the lighting is so much different. Like she may be utilizing gear or not, or she may have a pump, if your pictures are in the morning, and she may be in the pump after the gym. Like there are so many things on social media that people don't realize. I say to people like, don't compare, because I know obviously naturally we're human, we do compare to ourselves to others, but try not to, because on Instagram it's like comparing chalk with cheese. You can't do it, because there's so many variables that could be different in that one picture to, my morning pictures that I take and check in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's that also when we then reverse out of a prep and we go into an off season, you know, sometimes you can't push the calories as high maybe in the first few seasons. I personally know that I'm working with clients, you know, sometimes it's got to be quite a steady rate that which you bring the calories up. And then as the seasons go on, and you know, maybe you use PEDs as well if you've done it naturally, and you go, it's like you can have more food in the off season, you can bring yourself up to a better start point. And off the back of that as well, I think it's important to remind the listeners that when you are pushing through a growth phase, if you're a competitor and you know you want to keep progressing, there is that merit to, like you said, Laura, pushing the calories up as high as you can, as it were. So then the prep, and it's not easier because prep is not easy, but you know you're at a better start point, and that's from a health standpoint as well. But you know, maybe the calories don't go as low as you become more competitive and you do more seasons. I think that sometimes maybe more females, maybe males as well, but it's like, oh, but I don't really want them to go that high. But we're thinking for longevity, if you're pursuing this for years, that's actually a good thing, right? And I think that sometimes it's like for females, I don't want to eat that many calories, you know.
I think it stems back to what Laura was saying about the historic sort of pressure that women have had about their weight with the scales and what they eat. And it's almost this like, oh, as a female, you can't eat too much. Oh, you can't do that. Well, why? Why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
And the other thing to consider when comparing yourself to other athletes is if you're a first timer, you're not going to have that muscle mass that's going to require as many calories to keep you going because you haven't had the duration of time training. So you probably are going to have to go lower because you don't have the muscle mass to require the higher level of food during prep and off season.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly, social media doesn't help, like you say, Sarah, but also I feel like it is the coach's job, as it were, or under what we do to try and educate and inform the clients. And you know, sometimes it can be difficult because if you're a bikini athlete, say, and you're seeing that other bikini athletes, maybe you don't know about PEDs, etc., and you're seeing they're eating a lot and you're not, it's so important to not be thinking, you know, they're better than me because they get to eat more, or you know, and all of these thought processes that come into it. And other than not being on social media, which we all work through social media as well, so it's not an option, have you guys got any sort of, other than muting people, is there any other things? I know we've talked about this before, Sarah, anything else you'd sort of give recommendations if people are in a sort of social media hole and they just can't bring themselves out of it and they're not muting people, sort of tactics that any of you have got some ideas for?
One of my clients, Troy won't mind me saying this, during his prep, he actually, when he was scrolling, he actually just started removing people from his Instagram. So like he would just, I think he started prep with like, he followed like, let's say ballpark number, like 5,000 people. By the end of prep, he had like 800 and something because he just got rid of everyone on his Instagram. That was just, he just didn't want to see or watch anymore. And he just had only things that were gonna, I guess, positively impact him from scrolling on Instagram. So that's one thing that a lot of people could do, is instead of just mindlessly scrolling, actually just remove people, go through your following list and just remove people that you don't want to follow anymore, who you don't want to see, or whatever that may negatively impact you. That's one thing that you could do.
For sure.
I think remembering that we're all individual, and again, going back to the scale weight and the calories that you're on, that doesn't give any context to the height of your competitor, the other people that you're going to be on stage and the people that you're looking at. You know, you could look at somebody's Instagram and they're saying they're like, I don't know, 130 pounds. But what Instagram doesn't tell you is that they're 5 foot.
Yeah.
So you're 5'8", you're obviously going to weigh more. So it's I don't know, like a little post-it note somewhere, little affirmations, anything like that, where you're just reminding yourself that you are an individual and you're not comparable to everybody else that's on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure. And if someone's maybe further along than you as well, I think we can often get in our head, you know, that that person's going to be at the show. I'm going to compete against them. They're so much better than me. But also, I'm sure you'll all agree that even down to the posing, right? Like some people have a very good physique, but I've won by 1 point before because my posing was better. And, you know, it was, the physiques were sort of level, but the posing tipped it for me. And there's that as well, you know, and also you never know if people are definitely going to turn up to the show, you know, something could happen to them or what have you. And there's a big percentage of people that enter a show and they don't compete as well. So I think that's important when you sort of get in your own head, this person's going to be there, you know.
And there's always the potential that that person's peak could go completely wrong.
For sure.
There could be all manner of variables that could impact the actual look that they bring to stage, how stressed they get the night before the show, whether they adhere to what they've been set in peak week, whether the sources that they're using in peak week are different to the sources they've used all prep, and suddenly they've got lower abdomen distension because, you know, they're all gassy from X, Y, and Z that they haven't eaten for the last 22 weeks. It's so, you can't just base what's going to turn up on show day of what you see on Instagram. It's not real.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really all that it took me, I think, probably several years to realize this, but it's truly only what's under the lights on show day that matters. And Instagram is not going to be a representation of that. Like you might have, because I remember when I was a new amateur, I would look at social media, I would look at like Muscle Contest is the event promoter we have here. And so they repost everyone, right? So you try to look and figure out, oh, okay, this girl's 4 weeks out. I'm 4 weeks out. Okay, she's probably doing my show. But you might not realize that girl's only posting front shots because her tie-ins aren't there, right? And so then you see her on show day and you're like, oh, I was stressing myself out for no reason, or regardless, she's in a different height class than me, so it doesn't really even matter that much. So I think that's part of it. One thing I do personally that I will tell clients to try that's really been helpful for me is during the lockdown in 2020, I think I, like many people, was really struggling mentally. And one of my favorite performance coaches and authors, Brendan Burchard, he's here in America. He's like a motivational speaker, author. He talked about in one of his YouTube videos how if you start your day, if you start your morning by hopping on social media like Instagram, Facebook, you are in a comparison mindset for the rest of the day psychologically, and you're more likely to feel down and depressed. So I have a rule for myself. Like every day, I do not go on Instagram for the first hour I'm awake. Like regardless, if I accidentally open it, I'd like close it like I just like burn my hand on the stove. Like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. And that is honestly, it really helped me during the lockdown, and I've just kept it as a habit because like my first hour of my day, I'm, getting up anyways, brushing my teeth, making breakfast, like maybe doing, stuff around the house. Like you don't really need to be looking at it. You shouldn't, the first thing you do when your alarm goes off should not be to hop on your phone and start mindlessly scrolling. That's going to affect you. That's going to affect your mental state.
For sure, because also, in a prep, when you're sleep deprived or sleep's affected, I know some people do sleep for longer, but a lot of us sleep is affected. It'd be easy to sort of go on the Instagram at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep, and then you're starting that, and then you're trying to get back to sleep, and all of these things, maybe they're small percentages, like you say, setting up your day in this comparison mindset, focusing on someone else being at the show, someone else being better than you, looking in the night, all of those little percentages, actually, if that's accumulating stress, we know what stress does to the physique. And I think sometimes as a coach, it's like, I almost feel like I'm not trying to be mummy you, but all of these little things, if you are stressed and maybe you're not realizing it, and that's from a physiological standpoint, from a prep anyway, and in off season from training, etc. But all of these little things, it certainly does add up. And I think that sometimes it's like, from a coaching standpoint, we are only trying to help. We're not saying don't go on social media, but it's that acknowledgement. If you're looking on social media and you feel negative, then you have to own that, right? And you have to think, why is it making me feel that way? Because social media can be positive. It's, if you follow a handful of people and you look at people and it's like, and getting something from that, it's really, really important. But I know that some people will listen and they won't listen to what we're saying. However, if you're really in this, and you're really into bodybuilding, everything needs to be looked at. And maybe we could talk about stress in itself a little bit, from sort of, it's not something we've digged into on the roundtable yet, of managing stress as a competitor. I know that's a can of worms, girls, but it's important, right?
It's I was literally just thinking as you were talking, Sarah, it's, you've got to remember, in a low body fat environment, you are putting yourself in that fight or flight mode. Your body is going, what the fuck is going on? I'm being starved. It is going to be more naturally stressed. And as a result, you know, stress can lead to anxiety, and anxiety can lead to depression. And it's all those negative sort of loopholes. But it's that remembering the reasons why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. If you're not normally an anxious person and you find yourself more anxious in prep, it's more than likely going to be, if you are running any sort of PEDs or auxiliaries, or just the mere fact that your body is lower body fat than it should be, will automatically make you feel those feelings. So when I feel it, I try and remember, this is because I've got no body fat. This is why I'm feeling this. Because sometimes you get anxious and stressed about the fact that you're feeling anxious and stressed, and you don't know why you're feeling anxious and stressed, and it's just going to snowball. And I'm the worst for it. Like last year I was such a ball of, you know, anxiety and stress acutely through external factors, but it's something that I'm really going to remember. And the next time I prep, it's like, you need to chill the fuck out somehow. And like for me personally, it's like things like circular breathing, you know, you're counting, you're holding your breath, you're exhaling, you're holding your breath at the exhale. Even doing little things like kind of yoga based stretching, I find it massively reduces how tense and kind of up here I feel. So yeah.
Coloring in, I did loads of coloring in my last prep, like those coloring books and like shit like that. I would literally like sit down of an evening and just color. Like I'd move my phone away from me and just color or read. I read loads in prep. Like when I can't sleep, I'll get up and instead of scrolling from my phone, I'll just work through like loads of books and say it's 2 o'clock. I'll read for a couple hours, then go back to bed and then get up when I need to do cardio or steps, whatever. But yeah, like I think we all have our ways of de-stressing, but it's really important to have or find a way of de-stressing, because like Rose said, like you're already in a very stressful state being low body fat. So if we can try and work on just bringing you out of that stressful state for a minute by doing something like, I know it sounds silly, but like coloring or reading or going to yoga or doing something that, again, everyone's individual with what they do, but there's always some way we can try and implement something to try and de-stress you.
I love puzzles.
Puzzles. Oh.
Although last prep I
to-
got, it was so stressful in the end because it had loads of black pieces, and I was like, "Why have you brought me this puzzle? I'm so stressed. I'm not doing it." But normally, like intricate
It's
things.
the other thing. If your stress relieving activity makes you more stressed, you probably shouldn't do it.
I was
Like
like,
I remember
"Why is
last
this
year,
doing that?"
people telling me to meditate. I couldn't meditate because my head was so busy.
Yeah.
Trying to sit down to meditate made it even worse. I was massively into yoga before I started prep last year, and I couldn't. It's like the more relaxation yoga that I was doing, and I couldn't even do that again because my head was churning, and I'd be lying there on the yoga mat going, I should be relaxing, I'm not relaxing, now I'm stressed that I'm not relaxing, why am I not relaxing? And it's like, so I stopped doing it. And my thing is I will re-watch series on Netflix that I've already watched before because my concentration can't cope with anything new. So I literally will just start binge watching something that I've already seen about 5 times because it's predictable. I know what's going to happen, but it still occupies my brain.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, PD uses as potentially stimulant use as well. That does not help the busy head, as we know. And then if you're caning the caffeine, etc., all of these add to that busy mind. Again, it's something when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the depth of prep, you sometimes can't clock that, like you say, Maya, till you're sort of out of it. And it's like, bloody hell, there's a bundle of stress there. Laura, do you have any activities that you do in a prep?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I have kind of routines and things that I do to manage stress because usually like last year, especially during prep, I was just so busy. Like my days were so full with things that I have to be really good with time management. And I didn't have a lot of downtime. So like some little things, maybe sometimes I would go to get my nails done. Things like that can be kind of relaxing, but I like to, especially in prep, in general, but especially in prep, it's like a religious thing. I have to get up and do vacuums first thing in the morning. So it's not quite like meditation, but it gets me in the right headspace. I know I need to do them anyways, so your stomach's nice and empty. So for me, that's kind of a relaxing thing that I like to do first thing in the morning when I'm on prep for sure. I try to keep that habit in off season too. And then with the stimulants comment too, that is another thing that you have to remind yourself, whether you're taking a caffeine pill or something more intense, that stimulant is going to make you feel more anxious. So sometimes I'll also supplement with L-theanine, which is something that can kind of take the edge off of the caffeine and the stimulant. So that can help me on the days I feel like very overstimulated. And then sometimes I think it's just literally a matter of staying present and kind of like being where you're at. Sometimes in prep, I think you literally have to take your days like from meal to meal. Like, okay, I ate my meal and I have 3 hours and I'm gonna do X, Y, or Z, and then I'll eat my another meal. And just like don't think past that. I think sometimes we think about I totally relate to what you're describing. Like we have all these things going on, like we're juggling all these different balls, we have all these different, tasks to do every single day, and it can feel like the weight of the world is on you sometimes. So sometimes just like slowing down and like taking a breath and like just one thing at a time.
Yeah.
That's another key thing, is if you are going from one activity to another activity and your day is just full and you're like, I've got to be here by this time, I've got to be there by that time, that in itself is going to perpetuate stress. And actually, instead of filling your day with things to occupy yourself so you don't feel hunger, and busying yourself, it can be counterproductive in your stress relief. It was getting back from us from Ibiza, I literally spent Wednesday and Thursday running around like a headless chicken, and I was fucking wired because I just hadn't stopped. And it's really important to take, even if it's just like that hour where you read a book, where you watch something on Netflix, you have a conversation with your partner, something that isn't rushing around can really help decompress that stress that you've built up during the day. But if you just keep going, all you're doing is further stressing yourself, and you don't actually get that time to allow your body, like the physiological reactions to what you're doing, allow your body to reset and calm down. So even though it might be really uncomfortable to sit there and do it for an hour, by the time you get to 50 minutes, I guarantee you'll feel less stressed than you felt at the beginning of that hour.
Yeah, and we get those opportunities when we eat, don't we? It's something that I try and speak to clients about, and even in off season to a certain degree as well. But like sitting down, and certainly I do it myself now, to be present with the meal. Like Matt and I will turn our phone over and stuff like that, because it's like a client will message you or something like this. Instagram goes off, and then you're looking at your phone while you're eating. And when you're dieting, and the tail end of a prep, when you are hungry, that can even be a tool to actually help the hunger, where you sit down for maybe 20 minutes for a meal if it's big enough, obviously, but just to be present there and not think about all the other stuff. And then we turn the phone back over and we carry on, but that allows a bit of time rather than like a 5 minute on the go. Obviously sometimes it's busy and we have to do that, but if you can take some pockets of time in the day, like if you were to do your vacuums, do some yoga, like you say, Mana, do like an hour there, do your meals, that gives over a day quite a few opportunities to just touch base with yourself. Now, of course, with stimulant use and things, you can come out the back of a prep and think, what just happened? Like literally, I'm so low body fat, I've used stimulants and various other things. They're sort of the bigger contributors to what you feel like. When we come into that reverse out, be cool to sort of speak to you all about that, and then the going into the growth phase. There is people that have done the first part of the season that listen to the podcast, and already they're heading to post show and a growth phase. Those things that we've spoken about will be helpful here as well. But do you guys come across anything that we sort of haven't touched on that would be useful for the listeners that they maybe experience in this period that we could speak about? Because I know there is going to be obviously people in this phase.
I think it's the worry as a female of getting fat.
Yeah.
And that suddenly your clothes are starting to get tighter, there's less interest on social media, and it's that fear of getting fat. It's like, as a bodybuilder, you're not going to be fat if you're doing it properly. You're going to be softer, you're going to be bigger, you may not fit into all the clothes that you wore during prep, but that's not a negative. And it's trying to detach from this, if I eat more, if I do less expenditure, I'm going to get fat, and actually remembering that it is crucial to the progress that you want to make. You're not going to be able to progress if you stay that stage lean. So it's like, just during that reverse out of prep, it's remembering that the world's not going to end if you can't fit into that pair of shorts that you wore during prep, because otherwise you're not progressing, you're just stagnating.
And detriment to health for that long period of time as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we spoke about this last time, didn't we? It was where, it's necessary for us women and also males as well to stop being so low body fat for hormonal regulation and things like that. Like, we can't stay at such low body fat forever. We're going to have to come out of that at some point. And I think as well, again, we spoke about this the other day, and the fact that have a plan when you come out of prep. Like, yes, we're all individually different and we do come out of preps different, but like, I think ultimately, instead of just going into limbo and being like, well, what's next? Then then a lot of people do spiral when you can think, okay, so I'm going to do this in the next week or so. I'm going to implement these in there, like, as well as like keeping some things that you did in prep in there. Like, for example, like, I would still go out for coffee with my missus because, that's what kept me grounded, was because everything, and Ro, you actually touched upon this with social media after shows where everything just explodes on your phone and stuff, and you need time to breathe. So just going and putting your phone away for an hour or so and going out for coffee and doing the things that kept you grounded when you were in prep as well, and still keeping them in. It's really, really important just to stay in the routine that you know and love, and then that will just kind of guide you into the next phase nicely.
I'm sure you would agree, Laura. Have you got any additional sort of things that would be useful to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely have a plan. That's huge.
Mm.
I warn/beg clients, like, please do not book an all-inclusive vacation the week after your show. I've had that happen. It's the worst idea, because first of all, what if you're not ready? Like, what if you need to do the show that's 2 weeks later? You didn't even give yourself the option, first of all. And then second, you go do the show, and then you're going to be, in an environment with, unlimited food, maybe unlimited alcohol, and it's too much temptation. It's just silly. So have a plan. Any fun trips or things, like, I really prefer that clients have at least a month to just reverse and be in a more controlled environment before they're doing like fun things for themselves. So having that plan is huge. And then, like you said too, having those, keep your routines of going to the gym, keep your routine of doing cardio. You're just maybe going to do a little less than you were, all of that. And I think the meals out, the fun meals, the fun foods, it should be more planned. It shouldn't just be a free for all with your food. You should still have the structure with your nutrition, but if your family or your friends want to take you out to, lunch or dinner or something, okay, plan for that. If you have a meal, a meal or two that are, within reason, that either fit your macros, or you talk to your coach about it, you're likely going to handle those extra calories really well if it's intentional. And you're thinking about it, versus just like letting yourself eat every single thing you've been craving for the last like 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20 weeks or whatever it is. So
yeah, for sure. It's I mean, there is different ways that people coach, right? And it's always that for us, we're not judging, like we've spoken about already today. We are here to educate, and we're thinking ahead, right? Like, as coaches, it's like we're thinking about in X amount of months time and what this person does in the reverse out, that first month, like you say, Laura, or that period of time. It's a crucial time, and we want to be able to manage that as much as possible. And I think that sometimes, if you've had a long season maybe, or people are thinking, well, I've put everything into this, I need a break from my coach. It's like it's that sort of, I need to be able to help you here. Like, I'm not trying to be controlling, although we all sort of are, but it's such a crucial time. And on sort of what you said about the food, Laura, be interesting to have your thoughts on, if people do go against their coach, or maybe they don't have guidelines, or I have had many listeners where their coaches ditched them after a show, which I didn't think would be possible, but it is. And, they're in no man's land, and maybe they have had a binge or consecutive binges, and they're at a point where they don't know what to do. In the example, if they don't have a coach, have you got any sort of insight into how we could help?
yeah, I think there's a few things you could do. I mean, if you don't have a coach, or I think some people maybe can't afford one year round or something like that, right? Those scenarios for sure exist. Gradually stepping the cardio down. Like, if you can self-manage, gradually step your cardio down. Maybe you reduce it by 5 minutes, per session per week. That's a pretty, kind of very gentle ballpark. You might be doing cardio longer than you anticipate, but it'll probably help you kind of maintain your weight, stay in good shape, and keep on track of your food, whether you're going to follow a set meal plan, or create yourself a set of macros. There's 1,000 macro calculators online. And a good place to start is just kind of like bumping yourself up, just like slowly from where you were. And the biggest thing with reversing that I tell clients, and I do this, I have a little like presentation I've done a Zoom call a couple times on the reverse dieting, because there's also a lot of things going on physiologically. So I kind of try to explain that to clients, like, look, your hormones, your sex hormones are suppressed right now. Your leptin, your satiety hormone, your ghrelin, your hunger hormone are way off. You're not going to feel normal until everything's stabilized. So that's why this time is really important. And understand there's nothing wrong with you. There's a lot going on inside your body. And I think sometimes having that understanding is helpful for people to conceptualize, okay, what I'm experiencing is normal. I'm not a crazy person. My insatiable hunger will probably go away eventually. Kind of educating them, I think, is huge. And also reminding people, and even myself too, because I've had, out of my 8 preps, I would say I've had 1.5 reverses that were not good in that time. The rest were good. The rest were really good. 1.5 of them were not great. Your mental state is going to determine probably how the reverse goes. Like if you're checked out, if you're mentally done, if you're fixated on food, if you're, watching all the food porn videos on Instagram, like you're probably done. Like that reverse, just like, it's probably just not going to go well. So if you can get that person, or if you can get yourself in a more positive headspace, in a state where you want to have a good reverse and you want to show up for yourself, you'll do it. It's the body follows the mind, right? So same thing is true in prep as it is in our reverse. If our mind is checked out, we're not going to have our best outcome.
For sure. It's that dump, isn't it, after a show, like, whoa, I've been tunnel vision for however long. Suddenly it's physiologically, I don't know what's happening here, especially first time. It's like you say, the hunger is through the roof and you don't really know what to do with it. Obviously, we're going to advise that people keep their coach if possible. And when you think about a prep, try, like you said, finances there, Laura. Try and look at finances for at least 3 months after the show if you can, guys, because this is important,
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe,
Remember,
some coaches, I'll do this too. Like maybe a coach can work with you where maybe you're not checking in every single week, or maybe they can modify things for you, right? To like make it fit your budget. Cause you're absolutely right. You'll do better with a coach and having that accountability person.
For sure.
what you said, Laura, about your leptin and your ghrelin being through the roof, I think it's really important in the reverse to remember it doesn't matter how much food you put in your mouth and your stomach, you will not feel full. You will not be satiated, because it's a body fat thing, and the physiological responses that your body has to that low body fat. It's not about stomach filling. It's about getting those body fat levels higher, and that takes time. And it's reminding yourself of that in those first initial weeks, that yeah, you're constantly going to be hungry, but it's not going to be the same as the hunger on prep. But you need to control that, because it will take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
Explaining that to the people around you as well, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we've touched on this before, when you come out of a prep and non-bodybuilders that you associate with, they're like, oh, you've done that thing now, right? Okay, so we can go for meals. Or I've had people buy me so much stuff to say well done, chocolate, things like this. I could fill up a suitcase with it, and I'm like, I'd rather you sort of come around, we have a coffee or something, and have a nice chat about the show, etc. And people are trying to be nice. And also, I always remember my mum when I first prepped. She was so worried. Like, she was like, have you got an eating disorder? I was so lean with no muscle, because I wasn't into weight training before. Like you said, Mano, you haven't got the muscle mass. And I did the prep, and it was very difficult for her. But then off the back of it, she wanted to treat me to food, because it's like she's seen me do this thing and it's so new to her. I don't know if you guys had it, with people around you, where at the first prep, everyone's like, what is going on with this? Is this person okay?
My dad was like that. My dad was like, sorry, I'm
6 years.
getting quite skinny. I was like, yeah, I am.
6 years later, my mum still doesn't get it.
Yeah.
She's constantly like, I'm worried about you. I'm so worried about you. It doesn't matter how many times I explain to her, this is for a reason. This is a phase. It's not an eating disorder. It's because I want to compete. But she's very not supportive. She's of that mindset that women shouldn't have muscle. It's not feminine. It's not attractive. She's gone as far as to say that she thinks it's disgusting and she doesn't support it, which, yeah, has caused some ripples. But, you know, when I am in a diet phase, she still doesn't get that I can't. She wonders why I don't want to see her, and we all know what it feels like when we're on prep. But if you're exposing yourself to somebody that doesn't understand and is trying to push food on you and going, well, go on, just have a, why can't you have some cake? Don't be so silly. Don't be ridiculous. And they're trying to sabotage your goals and what you're trying to achieve. It is really hard when that person is so close to you. And it's just, for me, it's a case of constant reiteration. Or I have to say to her, you know, there's probably not much point in us meeting up because I can't do the things that you want to do with me. So you either have to accept that I'm not going to be as present as you want me to be, that I am going to be quiet, that I am going to be tired, or we just wait and see each other until after I've done with the prep. You know, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, it is tricky. Have you had this as well, Laura? It's hard, isn't it, when it's family?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that. That's definitely got to be a tough experience. My parents, I think, were more so just like confused when I first started. And now they're supportive. I mean, they've seen too. I used to work in engineering, and now I'm a full-time coach, and you know, I
That's
do better
badass.
than I did. And thank you, thank you. And it's like I get to work for myself and just hang out with my bikini clients, and you know, help women get in great shape, and it's awesome. Like go to shows. So they're supportive now because I've kind of done so much with it. But at first they didn't understand. I see this more with my clients because my family is not here in California with me. We're more spread out. So when we see each other, it's more like holidays, right? So there have been holidays, there's been Thanksgivings, or I don't think maybe mini Christmases, but there have been times where I'm dieting. And so they kind of respect, you know, what I'm doing, and I just, you know, nicely say no to things. But with clients, like I see that a lot. There was one show January of this year where I had two clients competing in the first show in LA late January, and one of my clients, first time competitor, her family were taking pictures after. Her family comes up with all these snacks, and I just see like they're like putting like Gardettos or like something in her face, and I'm like, you guys, and I was like, you guys stop, like stop. I was like, I'm sorry, but shut it down. She needs to just go eat a regular meal. You guys can go out to dinner tonight. Like she has a free meal, but like she doesn't need all this stuff in her face. So I felt a little bit like the bad guy. We were laughing about it, but it's like immediately as soon as she gets off stage, people are like forcing it in her face. So it's really hard, I think, sometimes for these new competitors, because your friends, your family may not understand. They're excited, they just want to do something fun for you, and I think you kind of have to explain to them like, hey, please don't bring me treats, or like one thing, or like, you know, and we'll all share stuff. Like don't go crazy with cookies or food or snacks like right after you're off stage. You're not even hydrated yet.
That's actually one thing you mentioned there, Laura, about sharing food. And that's one thing I did in this previous prep, my rebound, is we would like go out for food, but we would share a lot because one, it brings that it's just nice to go out with your partner to go and have some food, whatever. But then you're sharing it, which also, you know, you're not going overboard with things, but you're also able to just have that moment with the other half. I know it sounds a bit weird, but like I shared everything with my other half. I mean, she was like sick of food by the time I'd finished my rebound, but do you know what I mean? Like, and it was just nice to, and I'd never done that before. But when we would go out for like coffee or something, and if we wanted a cake, we'd just share it, and then, you know, you're still getting that treat, but you're still kind of on plan, and you're having that moment with your other half.
Sorry, you're so lucky to have a partner that you can share
Oh,
food
actually, that's
with,
so true. Yeah.
because Dan does not share food. I mean, to be fair, I don't share desserts, but yeah, even if it's like he orders sweet potato fries and I order normal fries, he's like, "You're not having one. You're not having
Oh
one."
my gosh.
Classic
Did
dad.
you share before, Matt? Oh,
Yeah.
you're not touching my food. And then with Matt, I'm like, okay, you can have a bit.
There was a time when we met my mum for brunch, and my mum is awful. She'll be like, "Oh no, I'll just have this," and then before you know it, there's a fork in your food, and she's helping herself to whatever's on your plate. And the fork will be in there before she asks, "Do you mind if I try some?" And she did it to Dan, and I just watched his face just go, and it was like evils instantly, but he knew he couldn't say anything because he didn't want to upset her. So he literally bitched about it. He still bitches about it now. Yeah, she had some of my French toast, and this was like 18 months ago now.
That's crossing the line there, French toast. I feel like as well, I don't know if you guys have had this, but I've experienced it a fair amount with post-show. Well, right after you step off stage, like you say, Laura, I've actually done it where I've competed multiple times. I've had this, and I've gone backstage to sort of collect my belongings, and there's girls back there that I've just competed against, or maybe they're in a different category, and they're all like, have some of this. And I had one show, I've mentioned this on the book before, and this girl had like a rucksack. She pulled out one of those things with all the Haribo and that sweets, pulled out one. Then she had another, and I'm talking like this big, and I'm thinking, how's that fitting in the bag? And then there was Reese's and various other things. And a bit of advice I try and give to people as well, I don't know if you'll agree, but things like your sort of Reese's and your pick a mix and things, you can track them within the sort of flexible diet and within your calories. And what I always try and say is, if you are going for a meal after the show, have your hydration first. We spoke about this the other day, actually, because, you need it. Have your hydration. Actually, it might be that you're very thirsty rather than ravenous, as it were. And then take a bit of time to get your stuff together, and then go for like a nice meal that you can't replicate yourself, like an a la carte, or like you say, a sharing platter or something like this. And I always put a huge emphasis on making memories, sitting with your loved ones and saying, thank you for supporting my prep, and sitting down and enjoying a meal. Whereas, this culture of like, smash all this food, then actually you could factor in a Reese's Buttercup, in your first week of the reverse out, or things like this. Do you guys sort of have a same ethos to that?
Yeah, I think like you said, Sarah, like have that time after stage where you can just take in all the emotion, take in what's happened, whether that be first place or whether you come third, fourth, fifth, whatever. Have that moment after the show where you do hydrate and you do go home and have a shower. Like the best thing is having a shower after show and getting your makeup off and then just getting some comfies and then or whatever. Like just have a moment instead of, like you said, rushing in and doing all that stuff. Because like the best feeling is like taking off your eyelashes and just being like, oh. That's the best feeling after a long day
And
on
all the
stage.
tan is in the shower, and you're like, oh my God, the
Oh.
next time you're like, this is so weird. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
For getting tan off, I discovered with Dan last year, Lush sea salt scrub. It's like it just gets rid of it.
Yeah, because it takes a while.
Yeah, it's that disgusting. I haven't put on any deodorant for over 24 hours. I've
Yeah.
sweated my tits off on stage. And I mean, like, you're Laura being over in the States and Sarah having competed abroad. And I don't know about you, Sarah, with where you've competed, but Alicante last year, it was a sweat box. It was so hot. Luckily, Toronto, they had air conditioning in the building, the same with the Olympia. But in Alicante, there was no air conditioning in the building. I felt like I needed a sheep dip. It was disgusting. Getting that tan off is like the best fit. And washing my hair, because like you're sweating so much, you've got so much product in it. You've now got glaze all through the ends. It's just, yeah, disgusting.
I actually really liked it when I competed in Mexico. I liked it because I could pump up with the sun coming through. There was like this massive window at the top, and it was coming through, and I was pumping up, and I was like, oh, this is so nice. It gets so cold in the UK. Like if you compete in November, oh my God. Like I get people to put the hairdryer up the end of the bed when I've had my first tan coat, and I'm like, the hairdryer, I'm so cold, and it gets in your bones when you're lean, you're like, oh my God, it's terrible. So I really like the international vibe, but it can get pretty hot and you get sticky. Obviously you can get water retention and things as well.
I personally don't like the heat. I would rather be cold and be able to put more layers on than be too hot. I just hate
I'm
it.
like a lizard.
Give me my other half. She's like that. She'll find a little ray of sun. She's like, oh.
On the sort of note of, I think a good sort of topic where I just touched on there about water retention and different humidity, we could maybe wrap up with a bit of a discussion there, because there are listeners that compete abroad as well if you qualify to go international. And Laura, you being over there, be super cool to, obviously there's manipulations we can make, but I think that sometimes athletes can freak out a bit because of the change of heat, and they're not expecting the physique to maybe change how it can. Obviously in the UK it's a little bit different.
Yeah, at some point I'd like to do an international show. Actually, I studied abroad in London when I was in grad school, so maybe at some point I'll be over by you ladies for a show or something. It really depends. Like in the US, it really does depend on the climate where the show's located. So Southern California here, for the most part, it's more dry. It's not as humid. But there was a show I did in 2022, the Pacific USA's, that was in San Diego, and the venue is kind of this almost like large tent that you'd have weddings or conferences in, and it has air conditioning, but it was a particularly hot, like unusually hot, like heat wave in San Diego. So it was like 90 degrees or something, and it was a bikini pro show. And you ladies know, like bikini athletes, like we're not usually like sweating up on stage. Like we want to look like calm and like, cool and collected when we're
Yeah.
up there. But almost everyone, we come off stage and it's hot up there. I could feel it. We come off stage and I just look around at some of the other athletes, and it's like some of them had sweated down their whole stomachs and backs and stuff because it was so hot that day. I had a show in South Carolina too last year, which is on the East Coast. And so it's right by the Atlantic Ocean. So that area can be really humid as well. I'm not sure if it's as bad as Alicante, but it was really humid, and like my hair was destroyed. Like naturally my hair is kind of curly, and it was just like, even after the hair makeup, it was just frizz. Did not look good. I definitely learned some things I need to do differently when I travel for shows and things just with my own hair. But yeah, it really depends, because if an area is more humid, you're more likely to hold on to water, right? If you're dry, like if you're in Vegas for the Olympia, the Olympia is going to be in Vegas this year. That's a desert. It's a desert. It's going to pull water out of you, just going to Target to do your run for bottled water. Like you're going to lose water doing that. So you really have to factor the climate in when you're thinking about peaking for these shows, especially if it's an area maybe you're not familiar with or you're traveling. That definitely plays a big role.
As to sort of how to keep the water off, the bits that I personally do myself, especially with the longer flights, I will try and keep my feet up on the flight. Luckily, the flight was empty enough that Dan was able to move seats both to Toronto and over to Orlando. So I put my feet on the armrest of the next seat because Dan wasn't in the seat anymore, to try and elevate them during the flight. And then once I'm there, I'll try and stay as cool as possible, like cold showers, utilizing the aircon, ice in my drinks, even as far as, this is obviously pre-tan, as far as getting cans of Coke from the fridge and putting them in your armpits, cold towel on the back of your neck, cold shower on your armpits. It sounds silly, just like putting something cold in your armpits. You've got that big bicep vein, a bicep artery that runs sort of through here, and it does massively help reduce how hot your body feels. And if you can bring your core body temperature down, then that's going to help mitigate any of the water retention you get from that heat and humidity, as well as, and I'm really bad for this, staying off your feet, because obviously gravity affects where the water sits.
Yeah.
If you can keep that circulation going by staying off your feet, it's going to help as well.
Like you say, for the busy mind, a lot of bodybuilders, we get into this because we're maybe a bit neurotic girls. We like to push to extremes, but yeah, I feel like as well, when you do go abroad, it may be the first time, or if there's a flight involved, some of the flights can be pretty lengthy, or maybe it's a bit shorter, but there's still considerations, even like you say, putting your feet up or wearing the like the DVT tights and things like that.
Socks.
Yeah, I've got a story I'll share before we wrap up, because you'll probably find it quite funny, although it wasn't funny really. When I competed in Mexico, when we came back, the guy that won the juniors, he got Mr. Universe there. He ate so much. Now, this is obviously not funny, but he just put it away like it was crazy. Then on the flight back, he was just swelling up, and I'm like, shit, like to a level where I'm thinking, this could be, very, very bad. So I'm trying to put my tights, my flight socks, on him, but he's humongous. And we're like, what are we going to do? And then he's worrying, and then we're trying to put his feet up, and he's very muscle bound. And I'm like, oh my God. So essentially, guys, if you are competing internationally, listen to your coach above all else, and plan for it if you can. Maybe don't reverse out to that degree while you're there at the all you can eat. Like you said, Laura, maybe don't book an all you can eat for directly after your show. just let things chill out.
Yeah. Just be careful with the sodium, right? Because that's probably what the issue was, is he was just retaining a lot of water.
It was what, like, to see it in person, you know, obviously in our realm, physique development's super cool. Like, what can happen to physique when you peak and everything else. It's fascinating. This was fascinating, but not in the right light, obviously. But it did help me see it, you know, in human form. I'm like, whoa, you know, like you say with the sodium. But yeah, hopefully.
I think one thing that's really important to consider is the timing of your flight back, especially if it's a long haul. Like, if you have the financial means to be able to stay in whatever country that you're in for a few days post show to allow your body to settle, especially if you are utilizing things like diuretics on show day. Because even when we flew to Toronto 3 days after Dan competed at the Universe, I was so worried about him up on that flight. He still had the loop diuretics going around in his system. He was going grey, he was sweating. It was really, really worrying. When we flew back from Alicante, that was the day after I'd competed. And I hadn't eaten particularly badly, but I was still dehydrated. We didn't use any diuretics, but the dehydration from the show day was still there. And even like reaching up to scratch the back of my head or trying to get something in the overhead locker, turning on and off the fan, I was cramping all down my lats. And it's something we've learned is actually I can't fly back the day after a show. I need a day or two buffer to allow that to settle, because it can be, it can be quite dangerous going up in a flight.
And then if you do stay abroad as well, sort of scoping out a little bit for peace of mind that there is sort of amenities there and you can still follow those guidelines for that first bit of the reverse out. Because essentially, you know, if you are in a country and it's all delicious cuisine and things like that, you can still experiment with that. But keeping in mind, you know, is different foods for the GI, like you say, Laura, sodium, and just being able to control it still a little bit to a certain degree and explore alongside that. But yeah, lots of things covered today. I knew this was going to be a good one, girls. Thank you so much for all of your time. I really do appreciate it.
No, it's lovely to speak to you, Laura. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you ladies as well. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
No, thank you, Laura. I really appreciate it. And I will say, I said to you actually, Laura, that sometimes I message people to come on the pod and they don't message back. And it was very nice that you accepted my offer and you did message back because, of course, you know, it's about empowering the community and offering that education. So I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey!